to Search Talk Live with search engine optimization and marketing experts Robert O'Haver and Matt Weber. Powered by the Robert Palmer family of companies.
All right, exciting week for me. I'm welcome back to Search Talk Live, by the way. I'm going to PubCon next week, and I'm just ecstatic. I'm already mentally there.
I'm going to Daytona Beach.
But with me today, Matt Weber of Roar Internet Marketing.
Happy Halloween.
Yes, happy Halloween, everyone.
You can't see our great costumes.
Yeah.
We are dressed as search engine superheroes today.
Yes. I got my cape on and everything. Those of you tuning in to Search Talk Live for the first time, we are a digital marketing podcast. We talk about everything to do with digital. We talk about search engine marketing, search engine optimization, paid search, social, conversion. We try to cover it all. And today I'm kind of excited because we have a different topic, something I'm not an expert on. So we're going to lean on our guests to answer any and all questions. And you can go to Twitter, type in hashtag SearchTalkLive, and get your questions, and we'll answer them live on the show. Our guest today is no other than Mike Moran. He is the senior strategist at Conversion. Did I pronounce that right? Conversion. Why do I have a problem with that? Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robert. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So today, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and all that good stuff.
Sure. So you mentioned I'm a senior strategist at Conversion. They're a social media listening agency and technology company. I'm also a senior strategist at Solo Segment, which is a AI content analytics company. My background is I worked at IBM for 30 years. I ran all sorts of parts of IBM.com for 8 years. I retired in 2008 as a distinguished engineer, which is an executive technical level position. The author of several books, co-author of one of the best-selling books on search marketing. My latest book with James Matthewson is on big data and content marketing, and have a long history stemming all the way back to IBM research in natural language processing and machine learning, both of which are big topics today in terms of artificial intelligence and how it's used in marketing.
Well, Mike, it sounds like you're quite accomplished.
Well, if I can't make myself sound accomplished, I don't know who's going to do it for me.
That's true. So what are the name of the books?
The search book is Search Engine Marketing, Inc., which I wrote along with Bill Hunt. First edition was back in 2005, and it's in its third edition now. My second book was called Do It Wrong Quickly. It's the first book on agile marketing. I believe that was in 2007. Mm-hmm. And the latest book, I think, was 2016. Sorry, it was just last year. So time flies. That was with James Matthewson, and that one's called Outside In Marketing.
Nice. Yeah, Bill Hunt's, I got a chance to listen to him at PubCon in South Florida, and he's been on the show, too. He's quite an impressive guy. He knows his stuff.
Oh, Bill is one of the sharpest search marketers ever.
Well, let's get into it. Mike, again, guys, if you have questions, you can go to Twitter and type in hashtag SearchTalkLive. So we're going to talk about using AI to evaluate search landing pages. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for our listeners?
Sure. So I guess kind of the first thing they need to really understand is what AI is. So maybe we could spend some time talking about that.
Sure.
But when we talk about using it to evaluate search landing pages, or honestly, you can apply it to any kind of landing page, not just a search landing page. What you're really trying to do is to understand how to improve the page so that it causes more people to convert. And so you could start out just looking to reduce bounce rate, for example. And eventually you might be focused on other types of analytics, such as whether the page gets shared, how often it provokes links, and conversion, and whether it's associated with conversion. But there's all sorts of kind of outcome data, which is what they call those types of metrics. And what you're really trying to understand is how to make it better. So today, the tools that don't use AI are basically A/B testing and multivariate testing. So if you think about how those things work, they work very well. If you have several different versions of a page, it can run it in production for a period of time, see how users respond to it, and it can tell you which page is better if you let it run long enough. That's really good technology. Everybody should be using it. The limit to that technology is that it can only tell you what's better of the things you give it. And so you could have 3 pretty bad pages and it'll tell you which of the 3 is the best, but they're all pretty bad. And it will not help you come up with ideas that you didn't have already. So it's kind of like election day. You can pick from between whatever candidates are out there for you, but there are no write-in votes. There's no way to just say, why don't you just make the best person the office holder? It doesn't really work that way. And so the difference with AI tools is that they have the ability to analyze things that you did not know to test.
Can you give us a real-world application of that from your recent experience? What came out of that?
Sure. So there's 2 things that AI can do to help with landing page optimization. The first thing it can do is it can actually predict the metrics before you put the page in production. So, for example, if we keep it simple and just talk about bounce rate, because you could try and predict a lot of things about landing pages, but maybe the most important thing to predict is bounce rate, because that's really all about the page. So conversion rate could be about lots of pages on your site, not just that page. And so if we just look at bounce rates, so for those of you who are uninitiated, a bounce is when someone comes to your site, lands on your landing page, so the very first page in a session, but then they leave your site. So that's a bounce. So if you have a high bounce rates, and so a high bounce rate might be in the 70s, all the way up to as high as you can imagine, 100%, in an awful case. And a low bounce rate might be in the 20s, maybe low 30s. And so we have some idea that some bounce rates are good and some bounce rates are bad. What you would love is when you're putting together a landing page, before you go to test it, before you put it in production, if you had some tool that could say, hey, I think this landing page is going to be about a 63% bounce rate page. And if it told you that before you put it in production, you might say, I wonder if there's a few things we should change about it. So the first thing that AI can do for you is it can predict metrics like a bounce rate before you put a page in production and actually suffer with it for a few days or a week or a month or however long you need to have that page in production before you're sure that it's giving you a good answer on the bounce rate. It's not just random. And so you save all of that time because you can actually say, oh, we already know this isn't that good. Let's fix it. The second thing it can do is it can look at all of the different aspects of the page and it can give you some ideas of what aspects of the page are contributing to the bounce rate and what aspects are actually reducing the bounce rate, which is what you want. So in machine learning, this is called feature analysis. So a page could have thousands and thousands of features, many more than any of us could ever analyze on our own. And so to give you some examples of features, some of them are things that you would probably understand really well. Things like what words are in the title? What words are in the body of the page? Does the page have images or not? There are other ones that you do have to put it in production in order to get. So things like what's the load time on the page? I mean, it's common knowledge that a page that has a long load time is probably going to have a higher bounce rate. And so that's borne out in a lot of the studies, but that's an example of a feature. So it could be something that's on the page. It could be something that's a characteristic of the page, like its load time. The other kinds of features that you can have that are things that go a little deeper rather than just looking at what words are on the page. That might not be that helpful. But you could look at things like for a page that is high in the funnel, is it best to avoid branded terms or to use them quite minimally because people are not really at the point of wanting to understand the brand yet? They're still trying to do some kind of learning about the subject. And so should you have a more generic page? Would that lead to a lower bounce rate? So those are the kinds of questions that by having enough features in your feature set, you can actually get advice as to what's to take action to make your bounce rate better.
Wow, that's huge.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, I mean, where does it get that data? I mean, when it tells you, okay, this is going to increase your bounce rate by 30%. Or
So the technology is not magic, although people like to portray it that way. Mm-hmm. What it's really doing is it takes two types of information and it puts them together. So the first type of information comes from your analytics. So whenever you have an AI solution, you have some type of model that's predicting things. Mm-hmm. And so in order to predict bounce rate, the way that many types of AI solutions would work are based on machine learning. Mm-hmm. So what machine learning does is it looks for patterns in data, and then it draws conclusions from those patterns. So for example, if you could give it the bounce rate of thousands and thousands or even tens of thousands of pages over a long period of time, and at the same time, the algorithm knew what was on those pages, so it knew what the content was on that day that you got that bounce rate, then what it could be doing is it could be analyzing those pages juxtaposed against the bounce rate that it knew that page had that day. And that can start to give you some information about what types of pages will bounce more than others. So some of these things are a bit difficult to do. I'm going to simplify it a little bit because some of the things that would happen is that if you just do a simple correlation analysis where you're saying that this page seems to be more correlated to conversions, you have to adjust for a lot of those things because a lot of times the way things work today is people will take a look at exactly the analytics I'm talking about. So let's say, for example, that they want to optimize conversions, which seems like a pretty smart marketing goal to have for any site. So let's say they look at their analytics and they say, okay, so what page is most correlated with conversion? So can you guys take a guess if it's like an e-commerce site? Do you have an idea of which page is most correlated with conversion?
The cart.
Actually, that's number 2. Number 1's the thank you page.
Yeah.
Now I don't think
I
anybody
crossed it off my list.
Yeah, exactly, because you're not a dope, right? So you immediately cross off your list because obviously it's not going to improve your site's conversion rate to make a better thank you page.
Right.
But I mean, we know that, right? And now the problem is though that if all you do is look at correlation, that's the kind of things you come up with. And so we're smart, we're not idiots, and so we say, well, of course we're not going to look at the thank you page that way. So that's fine. But then you would go look at the shopping cart page. Now, on every site, the shopping cart page is most correlated to conversions. But does that mean that it is the highest quality page on the site? Probably not, right? What it is it's the page you have to go through in order to get a conversion. So thank you page is number 1, cart page is number 2. So then you say, okay, well, let's throw those out. What we're really trying to do is look at the product pages, right? And really see which product pages are the highest quality content. And guess what you see when you do correlation analysis there? Well, the most popular products have the highest correlation to conversion. Okay. Does that mean it's because it's high quality content or because it's a high quality product? And so these are the kinds of problems you get into if you just look at the analytics and do a correlation analysis. That's why you need to do something deeper. The other problem that you have is that even if you could correct for all those things, you correct for the popularity of the products, and you really think you've somehow distilled this is the quality of the page, what you're left with at that point is you go to your content creators and you say, okay, we're going to show you the 5 best pages on the website. Here they are. And now what we want you to do is to go to all the other pages that you're making and make them more like these. And the first question the content creators will have is, more like these in what way?
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, you begin to drool because you really have no idea in what way. You just know that they're better. And so you might try and stare them down and see what things they have in common. Well, this is actually what the machine learning algorithm does automatically. And it doesn't do it with just a few things that we might pick out. It can do it with tens of thousands of features. So it can do it for everything like we talked about before, of things like how fast the page loads, to things like, did you use bullets rather than paragraphs? How long is the page? What grade level is it written at? Does it have a lot of links on it to take you to new pages, or does it have very few? What color is the call to action button? There's all sorts of things that it can look at in order to try and see what are the factors that seem like they're most correlated with conversion. And so instead of showing the content creators the pages that are most correlated with conversion and asking them to kind of divine what it is about them that's really working, instead what it's doing is it's giving you very specific things that it's found. And you can use this kind of algorithm across many, many sites, but what I think might make more sense is to use it just on your own site, because then you're really finding out what your visitors need from your content.
Right.
Mike, can you help us distinguish between machine learning and artificial intelligence? Are they the same? We tend to put an equal sign between those two terms.
Machine learning is a kind of artificial intelligence, so it's a very specific technique. And there are other techniques that you would think of as artificial intelligence. One of them is natural language processing or text analytics. So there's a lot of different techniques of artificial intelligence. There are things that are called clustering algorithms. So there's lots of different ways of doing artificial intelligence. And kind of the joke of artificial intelligence is, if I can tell you how it works, it's not artificial intelligence. So it's basically something that the machine is doing by doing some kind of extensive pattern analysis to really try and understand, with understand in quotes, the information that's being presented to it. So the way machine learning specifically works is that you give it some type of data where you know the correct answer. So, for example, in the examples that we're doing, where we're talking about landing pages, so if we give it a whole bunch of landing pages that we know the actual bounce rate for, then it uses that as what's called training data. So you're training the model. So when you're training the model, what you're basically doing is trying to show the machine learning program what examples are from real life that it can then look for the patterns in. So it starts to understand which features, which characteristics of the pages seem to be correlated with the ones that have higher or lower bounce rates in this case. And so as you're doing that, you're suddenly in the position of saying, okay, well, we can run this against the training data, but how will we know when the algorithm has had enough training data that it's doing a good job? And so in order to do that, what you have to do is you have to test it. So the way you test it is you take a whole bunch of training data where you know what pages they are and you know what the bounce rate is in our example, but you also take another set that you have the same information for, another set of pages along with their bounce rate, and you do not use that to train. That is called the holdout set. So you hold it out of the training. And so that is your test data. So you have all this data where you know the page and you know the bounce rate, and some of it you use to train the model, and the rest of it you use to test the model, because you know what the right answer is. You know what the actual bounce rate is for that
Sure.
page. So then you see what the model tells you should be the bounce rate for that page. Now, the reason you have to do that is because if you don't do that, you're kind of teaching to the test. So if you think about what it's like in school, if you really want the test to tell you whether people are learning something, you don't give the test questions ahead of time and give the answers. What you do is you teach a lot of the material. You might give some quiz questions with some answers, but the actual test questions the student is going to see for the first time, so you can really find out if they understand the material. And this is the same way that you would test a machine learning system.
So in what way does AI incorporate user attributes into the model?
So are you talking about in situations where users would be judging pages, or are you talking about a different kind of user attributes?
Different kind of user attributes. So what's the reaction that a male is going to take to the page versus a female?
Got it. So the model can take those things into account. The more of those attributes that you have, the more the better the model can be, as long as those attributes themselves actually matter. So, for example, if it really matters whether someone is male or female in terms of how they bounce or convert on a page, then having that data going into the bounce rate, so having a bounce rate for males and a bounce rate for females, would allow you to create two different models, so that you would then know whether the page was better for males or females, or you'd know how to improve the page, so you would try to be improving it for both males and females. Or maybe if the page was visited, 85% of the time by females, you would maybe not try so hard to improve it for males. You'd only try to improve it for females. So that kind of data can be very helpful. The problem is that you need to have a lot more data in order to train. Now, the more different characteristics you have, the smaller the data sets are of the training data that you're dicing up. And so it gets harder and harder to actually have enough data to do a good job of training the model.
Gotcha.
But in a lot of situations, you can do that. The other way of using user attributes is if it's a different kind of problem. So if it's not a landing page problem, if it's another kind of problem you're applying AI to. So one that we work on at Conversion is sentiment analysis. So you know that a lot of times in social listening, sentiment analysis isn't terribly accurate. And the reason it's not accurate is because most of the time the sentiment analysis is done just looking at the words, where, if somebody has a tweet that says, "I spent my entire lunchtime online at Wells Fargo," it doesn't end the tweet by saying, "and therefore they suck," right? So there's no word in there that tells you the person's angry, but you know they're angry because your context of the world is you should not have to spend an hour online at the bank. And so by using machine learning, what you do is you actually have people analyze whether that tweet is positive, negative, or neutral. And what you're doing at that point is you're trying to make sure that you have accurate training data based on a person's judgment. And so there's a bunch of things that you have to do there. So one thing that you would do is you would make sure that the task is well understood. So an example of that is, if I gave you a tweet that said, "I'm so glad I have Verizon because Sprint drops the call every time I'm in the car," and I said, "Is that positive or negative?" You wouldn't know, because you want to know positive for who, Verizon or Sprint. And so by being very, very careful about saying, here's what the task is, that can help people to agree with each other. And that's the next step, would be to have several people look at it. So 3 people maybe you want to agree, not just one. Because the truth is that people are only accurate of saying a tweet is positive or negative 89% of the time. And so if you just have one person annotating everything and creating your training data, your model will never be better than 89% accurate, because that's how good people are. And so what you're trying for is a model that's better than the way people would do it. And so having either objective outcome data, like the bounce rate or the conversion rate of a page, where you actually know the answer and it's an objective answer, or having multiple people agree on a human judgment, which they often call intercoder agreement. Having either of those things really makes sure that the quality of your training data is really, really high. Because if you train the machine learning algorithm with bad data, you're going to get a bad model.
Sure.
If you train it with really good data, you're going to get a good model.
Well, I mean, it's kind of, think about this for a minute. This is kind of scary because, especially for conversion experts, what if you dynamically had a website that made those changes on the fly as it's learning, a predictive model to where it eventually optimizes the site to where it's converting at its highest?
Right. In essence, doing what the Google algorithm or the Google AI does, right?
Right.
Adapting itself based on your history in real time to give you the most relevant queries.
And basically dynamically A/B testing.
Right.
That honestly is where it's going.
Yeah.
So the company that I work with, Solo Segment, has a lot of this landing page technology that we're talking about, and we're working with clients to test it now. But the truth is that what you asked is exactly where it goes, right?
Yeah.
So in the beginning, you're using this to have people improve the pages, but you could fairly easily envision a situation where there are at least some of these changes that could be automated. So if we suddenly found out that having the company name should be the last thing in the title, because that converts better for a particular company where people know their brand name, and you can just go through all the titles on the site and you can automatically move the company name to the end, or you can add the company name when it's not there, right? So all these kinds of things are fairly simple to do. If you know that bullets do a better job than paragraphs, you could go through the content and you could analyze paragraphs that really could be written as bullets, and you can change them, right? So there's AI technology called text generation. So this is different than text analysis, right? Text analysis is looking at the text that's there and trying to, quote, understand it. Text generation is trying to actually write text. And if you look at the kinds of applications that are out there already, if you pick up the newspaper, if anybody still reads newspapers, or if you look at things online with news stories, simple news stories like the score of the World Series game or an earnings report, these stories in many cases are already being written by computers rather than human reporters, because the story is simple enough that it follows a certain pattern of just understanding what the events are or calling out what the salient parts of the story are, and that pattern can be done quite well using text generation. And the stories don't come out sounding the same. They have enough smarts in them to vary the sentences, to vary the way the story's told, so that they don't seem boring, even if you read 3 game stories in a row or 3 earnings report stories in a row. And so you can see that we're at the beginning of being able to do that kind of text generation. And so you're right when you say, boy, couldn't some of these things be automated once the machine knows what's wrong? And the answer is yes. Some of them can be today. And, and the way computers work, that they get faster and cheaper every day. And so if it can't do it now, wait 10 minutes and it'll probably be able to do something new.
There was a company that offered an analytics package that produced narrative/text-based reports based on your analytics data. I don't know if they're still around, but the report would come out and it would say, your most popular place to get visits from was Annapolis, but your visitors from Atlantic City were more valuable because they converted at twice the rate. It would spit out that language-based text in the report so that you, as the SEO or analytics person, didn't have to accompany the data and put in your own individual perspective.
Right. And so that's been I mean, everybody's talking about AI right now, and it's the flavor of the week. But the truth is that these types of problems have been worked on since the 60s and 70s, and so there's been several different ways of implementing AI over the years. In the beginning, they had systems that were typically rules based, and you could imagine writing a rule that would generate the kind of text that you were talking about, right? So it can just say, if a certain city has a higher traffic number than all the other cities, put that name in the middle of this sentence that said your highest traffic was from blank. And if there was another city that had a higher conversion rate than that city, then say, but more of your customers converted if they came from blank, right? So you could kind of put these templates in place and just have rules that filled in the data in the templates, and it would look like plausible text. What would typically be true, though, is that if I ran that report next month, it would have the exact same words in there except two different cities than it did last month. And so they were kind of repetitive. Mm-hmm. They worked, but that was a very simple form of text generation using rules. And so a lot of the original AI technology used rules, just like we talked about the simple sentiment analysis that would say, hey, we have a whole dictionary full of words that we think are positive and another dictionary full of words that we think are negative. And if you see those words, then say it's positive or negative, right? Yeah. It's a very simple rules-based system. You know, back in the day, that was considered to be AI. And what's happened was that as computers got faster and faster, more of it moved to pattern analysis. And pattern analysis is really important because with rules, you typically only get one answer. If this, then that. Mm. And with pattern analysis, you can typically get more nuanced answers. So, for example, if you think about the way that Google search is different from the old-fashioned Boolean search, right? If for those of you who are old enough, and you went to the library and you sat down in front of a LexisNexis system to try and search the news, you would say things like, I'm looking for stories about, if you were looking for a story about Bloomberg, you would say, you know, you'd put in Bloomberg, and then you'd get all sorts of stories about the mayor of New York City, and you would say, oh, no, I don't mean the person Bloomberg, I mean the company Bloomberg. And so then you'd say Bloomberg and not mayor, and then you would try and see if that would work. And so you'd put in all these essentially rules that were trying to find the right information. Well, now Google doesn't work that way. First of all, it's a lot harder for people to formulate those rules, but they don't even work that well. Yeah. I mean, if we go back to a social media example, this is also a Conversion example. Suppose you were the company Sprint and you were trying to get all of the tweets about your company. You can't just go in there and say Sprint. That's not going to work, right? So because you're going to get all sorts of NASCAR sprint car races, you're going to get all sorts of high school track events, right? So you can't just use the word sprint. So if you say, hey, sprint and not car, because you're trying to get rid of all the NASCAR tweets that say sprint car, well, then you lose that tweet we talked about before that said Sprint drops my call every time I'm in the car. Well, they really wanted that one because it's about the company. But so those rule-based capabilities are, people can think of them as AI because back in the day, those were called expert systems where they were full of all these different rules, trying to have very complicated rules to come up with answers. But the problem is that they were very difficult to maintain, and eventually you could not make them any better. They were very brittle. Mm-hmm. They would break very easily. They didn't scale very well. And instead, if you replace that with systems that use AI technology, so one of the things you could do with this example of trying to find the tweets from Sprint is you can show a list of tweets on the screen that all have the word Sprint in them.
Mike?
And sorry.
I'm sorry. Hold that thought real quick. We've got to take a break.
Search Talk Live is sponsored by the Robert Palmer family of companies. Check out robertpalmercompanies.com for more information.
A press release is a very effective way to draw attention to your business and something every company should take advantage of. Press releases are a great way for your company to announce new product launches, company milestones and new partnerships, and even up-and-coming events. The hard part is knowing which press release distribution service to use and which is the most effective. Well, I have the answer. PR Underground. PR Underground is both an effective and affordable distribution service. For just $49.95, PR Underground guarantees your next press release will be on Google News, digitaljournal.com, social media, and over 150 news and TV websites such as ABC, NBC, Fox, and CBS. Now, if you upgrade to the Diamond plan, your announcements will appear on Yahoo Finance and an additional 100 news sites and blogs. This is one of the tools I recommend you use for PR, marketing, and SEO. PR Underground offers a huge distribution at a great price. Go to prunderground.com, that's prunderground.com, and send out your next press release. Enter the code SearchTalkLive, all one word, and get 25% off your first press release.
Find the true value of your home when you log on. Homevalue.com.
Get your questions in on Twitter. Type hashtag SearchTalkLive and your question. Now back to the show.
Those of you just tuning in, we're talking with Mike Moran. We are talking about using AI to evaluate search landing pages.
Yeah, we're into some meaty topics, and I almost regret that before the break, we didn't give the audience a chance to just sit down and take a deep breath, because so far in the show, we have discovered via Mike that there is a way to not only evaluate your landing pages during traditional A/B testing, but use AI to predict before the page comes out what the bounce rate might be. And we've talked about that we're not too far from websites automatically adapting themselves with specific elements that could facilitate conversion based on user attributes.
Yeah, that really is a scary thought for me.
It is.
You're talking
scary
conversion optimization,
thought.
You're talking SEO, content. I mean, everybody's out of job.
Yeah, in real time. That's right. Yeah, and we were just talking before the break about the auto generation of content based on statistical data, which is already happening in our lives, but we just don't realize it in many cases.
Well, that's how you can tell it's good.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if you knew it was being generated by a computer, you would say, well, that's garbage, and it wouldn't work. Right. So the thing that I think that in many ways, the advent of AI is a personality test, because some people look at it and say, oh my God, we're all going to be out of jobs. And there are other people saying, boy, it's going to do a lot of the work for us and we'll have a lot more leisure time. And the truth is, those are both the same outcomes. It's just a question of what your attitude is about that. So it's, so the thing to really think about is that maybe it's true that AI is coming for all of our jobs, but when you see statistics out there, and they are out there, that say things like, half of the jobs today will be gone in 20 years and things like that. Yeah. Those are those statistics might be true, but I don't think it means we'll have a 50% unemployment rate. I mean, 200 years ago, I believe 97% of the U.S. population were farmers. And I think now it's a little over 2%, but I don't think we have 85% unemployment. So somehow we found other things to do. And so is it possible that this will be different than it's been throughout history? Sure. That's always possible. But, we've seen long lists of technology show up that have obviated all sorts of jobs. And while it's very wrenching for people, and I don't mean to gloss over how difficult it is for people to adjust, I think that in general, we've found ways of moving to a higher level each time and still being able to use the technology to actually help us be more productive.
Yeah, I think a lot of times what we see as a revolution is really an evolution.
Yeah, we adapt,
Yeah.
And something like that is not going to be for every website. I mean, you're talking big data. You're going to have the big data to make,
I think that's true. I think you're going to see it happen with larger websites first, but and if it's true that that half of us in 20 years won't have the job we have now, the truth is that I think most of the people listening on this call have a job that didn't exist 20 years ago. So, this is, I don't think anybody on this call who's a search marketer, who's a digital marketer, would like to go back to 1997 and have whatever job they had then. I think most of us are a lot happier with the jobs we have now.
Yeah, absolutely. SEO was a lot easier.
It sure was.
Yeah, based on simple rules.
Right.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, well, Google really was the first big data play by using link analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you can imagine all the simple rules of engines like AltaVista that were out there, that were just looking at, AltaVista, Excite, all those fabulous old-timey engines where it was very easy to get your page to the top by just sticking a few words in the title. And did that actually produce better search results for searchers? Definitely not. But was it easier as an SEO back then? Sure it was, right? But that's not really what the goal is, right? The goal is, basically one of the things to think about is if what you're doing as a search marketer is actually good for all three parties in the transaction. If it's good for the searcher, if it's good for you, the search marketer, and it's good for Google, you can imagine that that's a technique that will last for a really long time.
Absolutely.
But if it's only good for you, then it's probably going to be something Google's going to work really hard to make sure it stamps out.
Sure.
And so all of those kinds of tricks are things that are going to go away. And with the kind of data that Google has and the kind of AI technology that they've put in place, it's you can imagine that it's an uphill battle at this point for you to be focused on those types of things.
And I think that's something that Google would probably sign off on, the fact that it is all about the user with something like that, with the conversion optimization, all of that.
It all comes back to bringing the best results to the user.
Right. And I remember, it was probably 10 years ago, when I was speaking at a search event, and I was asked about a technique that was all the rage back then called link sculpting, where people had somehow figured out that if they changed the way the links worked on their website, that it passed the link juice differently and they could make some things pop up to the top. And at the time, people were asking me, boy, isn't this a great thing to do? And I said, no, I think you're a bunch of idiots. I don't know why you're doing this stuff, because it takes an enormous amount of time. And, if you think Google's going to, let you get away with this and be tricking them into showing the wrong pages, you're insane. They're going to figure out how not to do this. And they said, how could they possibly do that? They're all their stuff based on link analysis. And how could they not do that? They said, that's why all these link farms are working. I said, well, those people are idiots too, because Google's going to figure out how to make sure that doesn't work anymore. And I said, well, what if they suddenly started using other techniques instead of only using link analysis? And everybody said, that's impossible. How could they ever do that? Well, everybody knows now that they do, right? And so and that's the reason they do, right? So, this is like an existential threat to Google. To spamming, right? It's going to ruin their entire business, and they have more money than God. And so anybody who doesn't think that they're going to spend every last dime to make sure that this stuff goes away, they are going to. And so what we've seen in recent years is there's a lot fewer people out there that are trying to trick search engines. They've moved on to ad fraud because it's easier. And so, that's really what the lesson is. And a lot of that lesson is about big data and AI. Mm-hmm. Google has it and you don't.
Yep.
Mike, would you give us some sense of what role AI is playing right now in the search results that we see today?
Boy, there's so many different places that it's. Yeah, I'll try and make a list, right? So some people would consider natural language processing, text analytics AI. So Google, for example, knows the difference between a noun and a verb usage of a word. It can do this in dozens of national languages. And that's, quite a trick in and of itself. The thing where it says, where it uses spelling correction, where in the beginning it said, did you mean this? And now it doesn't even ask you anymore. It just says, hey, I know what you typed and this is what you really meant. So, click here if you really meant the thing you typed, but I think you didn't. And how is it able to do that? Well, it's able to do that not only by using text analytics, natural language processing, they mean the same thing. That's why I keep saying them over and over again, because people sometimes don't know they're the same thing. So not only does it use that technique to understand what kinds of words are similar to other words, but it's also using all of the data that it has to identify the fact that this is actually a popular variation and that there are many search results out there for this variation and not for the thing that you typed. It's using machine learning with the Panda algorithm. So for those of you who don't know what that is, they several years ago started to have human raters go in and score pages to say it's high quality, to say this page was a good experience, I would come back here again, it had good information. There's a whole book out there where they're training people to say this is a good quality page. Now, you remember we were talking before about teaching coders whether to say something was positive or negative in sentiment analysis. Well, this is the same technique. They're teaching coders, people who are coding a page, to say, is this high quality or low quality, based on all these different criteria. Mm-hmm. And so they're using that as part of how they're ranking. So instead of just looking at links or just looking at social media chatter about a URL, they're also using this scoring. And so you might say to yourself, well, come on.
Citation.
How
everything.
can Google, how can Google score every page out there and score it in relation to every search anybody ever can do? You know, I know they're rich, but I mean, they don't have that much money, do they? And the answer is no, they don't. And so what are they doing instead? What they're doing instead is exactly the same types of things I was talking about earlier. So they have machine learning algorithms that go in and use the scores of certain pages, and what they're doing is they're extrapolating those scores to all pages that look like those pages. So you might say, well, what does it mean to look like those pages? Well, that's where you get into that feature analysis that we talked about before, where there might be thousands and thousands of features about a page that they have found to be interesting. So does the page have ads on it? Does the page have lots of links on it? Does the page have a certain grade level? Does the page have grammatical errors? There could be thousands and thousands of things about the page. And so what they do is they may not have had a human rater who is rating your page, but what they've done is they've rated a page that their algorithm says is similar to your page. And so they give your page the same score. And so that's how they're using machine learning to actually scale the limited amount of budget that they can apply to have humans rate pages. And those are just a few of the places that machine learning and other types of AI techniques are being used. Search engines are incredibly complicated feats of human engineering, and there's all sorts of artificial intelligence strewn through the whole thing. There's AI just involved in understanding how often to recrawl pages, something that simple. And the AI actually is used to identify which pages are similar to each other, and it knows from history which ones tend to be changed more often, and so it goes back and checks the ones that change more often more frequently, as makes sense. And so it's littered throughout all of the technology Google has. In fact, you're at a point now where they don't have AI programs and non-AI programs in general. They are applying AI to just about every part of Google that you can imagine. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying Google over and over again, it's shorthand for every search engine. If it's Bing, if it's Baidu, it doesn't matter. They're all doing the same thing. They've all got loads of data and they're all doing the same thing.
Yeah, I would have to disagree with you there. I mean, it was just kind of a good example too. Is like, we were talking about before the show with Facebook and how their algorithm, once you run an ad for 2-3 days, how it optimizes when off of purchases and all that stuff. That's all, the AI.
It is, and what they're doing is they're taking, even understanding which things show up in people's streams has to do with all sorts of algorithms that say, how close is this person in connection to you? And one of the ways that they figure that out is do you tend to look at the things that they post? Do you tend to share the things that they post to your networks? The more of that you do, the closer they think they are to you. And so they're going to show much more of that other person's stream to you than they would show to someone else, right? So if it's someone who's your best friend and you're constantly sharing the things that they share and responding to them and looking at the things that come through from them, then they're going to figure that out fairly rapidly, and they're going to show you a lot more information from that person than somebody who comes along just once in a while, right? And so those are the things that they're looking at. And yes, they're using machine learning all the time to try and look at the patterns, because if you think about what's happening, it's exactly the same process we talked about before. They have an outcome or a set of outcomes, things like, did you share it? Did you look at it? Did you reply to the person, right? Those are outcomes that say you're engaged.
Right.
Now, and so they use those outcomes to then analyze what are the things that cause you to do that. So one thing could be the source of it, right? That's probably a really important one on Facebook. Who's the one who posted it? And that tells them about your relationship. But it could also be that they find out that you tend to share more things that have pictures in them. Well, if that's true, then they're going to start showing you more things with pictures in them. And so you can think of all the different features that there could be about a Facebook post, whether it's who it's from, what kind of content it is, what subject it's about. All those kinds of things are things that can be fodder for machine learning and other AI techniques in concert with that outcome data. And it's because these companies have that outcome data that they have all the power of being able to use AI in ways that we don't.
Interesting simple test on Facebook. When next time you're on Facebook, go to the settings and click the show this by recent activity, filter it by chronological rather than the AI. And I think when you look at it and you go, yeah, you guys got it right. I didn't need to see all this crap.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
that's
do.
really true. Yeah. And Facebook is just the first one to do it, but you can imagine that as more and more people are joining social media, as people are following more people on Twitter, they're connected to more people on Facebook, that the amount of data coming through is absolutely impossible for anybody to go through sequentially in manual fashion. And so you have to have these kinds of AI filtering mechanisms, or else you would run out of time in the day.
Mm-hmm. Your comments were really interesting to me because I just read an article about how Facebook uses panel-based data to influence the results of what you see. And I guess now what they're doing is they're using that as that learning data that you were talking about in the earlier part of the show.
Yeah, and if you think about it, that panel-based trick, it's the same thing as Google raters. It's the same thing, right? It's the same exact technique, right? Because the panel is kind of looking at content and saying, boy, that content seems really good. That's really shareable. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And just the way the Google raters are doing the same thing. And so that's how you can get human judgment into what seems like this cold algorithm technique. What's really happening is that it's a way of capturing the human judgment as data and being able to extrapolate from the few things that the human beings rated to all of the other things out there by seeing how similar they are to the ones that were actually rated.
Interesting.
Mike, this is Matt's idea he came up with. Probably my favorite part of the show, segment of the show, one of the parts.
It's called Believe It or Leave It. And, Mike, we're going to give you 3 statements that we did find on the internet, so they got to be true. And we're going to ask you to tell our audience whether they should believe it or leave it. You ready? The first one, I wanted the audience to know that we came up with this before the show. It's very important that the audience knows before the show.
Yeah,
But your believe it or leave it statement number 1 is, this will be a layup for you. Next year, Google will launch an A/B testing tool that immediately projects the results of your tests based on their historical data.
Boy, I mean, I don't have any inside information, but I would say believe it, because I think they have enough information from all of the Google content experiments data that they may be able to do exactly what we're talking about, where we can project what the better page is just by looking at all those features. I think that's entirely possible.
Man, if you're listening to the show right now, I hope you just went, holy crap.
I know Gary listens to the show, so. Yeah, Gary, put that out, please. No. All right, number 2, personalized web content to only show the content options the user selected in the past will be the hot personalized trend in 2018.
I mean, I don't think that's true. Okay. I mean, it's possible that that the statement is true, that someone put that out there, but and maybe they have reasons for saying that. But I personally think that just using data of what a person has done in the past is not really the best predictor of what they're going to do in the future in most situations. So, in fact, a lot of the clients that I work with are B2B companies. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you come to a B2B website and you look for something and you buy it from them, if you come back 2 weeks later, you're probably not going to buy the same thing, right? You're not going to be looking for the same thing. And so I don't think that past patterns are necessarily the best, and they're certainly not the only way of predicting what people will really be interested in.
So you say leave it, and I think
I would say leave it.
Your perspective is interesting, but if it was adapted, imagine how great it would be for eBay or Amazon that has millions and millions of SKUs, and they know, Matt, you are never touching the gardening stuff. So anything related to gardening, we're never going to show you.
That's a little different, though, because what happens there is that the interest area that you have is based on them knowing it from past activity, but it's not necessarily the only thing they know.
Right.
They know what everybody has done in the past, right? And so they can look at people like you and say, they know that you're never going to look at those things because a whole bunch of people are exhibiting the same behavior. That's different from just looking at your personal past behavior, which is how I interpreted the question.
Gotcha. All right, number 3, as more website traffic is sourced to mobile, longer website content will be less effective.
I believe that. I think it's already true. I think it also it's not just that it's the content should be shorter, but I think it also changes the form. I think we're seeing more. I mean, these are things that are borne out in a lot of the landing page testing that we've done. Is that there's much more skewing to video on mobile devices than text, because I think video is a little easier to consume when you're on the move. So I would say believe it.
Okay.
Man, this has been a deep show. I know. This has been one of the deepest Search Talk Lives ever.
I can see people deer in the headlights right now.
Right now. Yeah. And I think we've either gotten one of two reactions. I think, as Mike said, we've either got people that are like, man, this is super exciting. This is going to make things better for everybody. And then I think we've got a bunch of people listening to the show going, holy crap.
Yeah.
Well, those are the ones who have to hire me.
So do you know of the tools that are actually out there now that give all those things we discussed?
So on the social media listing side, the Conversion tool does all of that kind of AI technology for social media listening. And Solo Segment is doing consulting engagements now for people on their landing pages. And both of those tools are tools that I'm very familiar with because I work with those companies. And I think right now what you're seeing is that these kinds of small companies have these kinds of solutions. I think if you work in a really large company and moving the needle on marketing is really important and valuable, you should go there now. I think you could wait a couple of years if you have a small budget and you'll see marketing automation systems with this in it.
Okay. Well, we got one more thing before we end the show. We got to do the Search Talk Live tattoo.
Yeah, we've gotten into some deep topics here, but Mike, we're going to ask you to bring it back up to high level. What's your best, most succinct, tattooable piece of advice that you want to leave the audience with?
If you're not ready for AI, you can get ready for it by focusing on your processes and the data they collect.
All right, that might be a calf tattoo.
That was pretty good. That would fit in a tweet.
Yeah. Definitely not a bicep tattoo.
They just have to embroider small.
Yeah.
Embroider. Whoa.
Wow.
What tattoo artist do you go to?
I'm telling you, this is they got to do this.
Yeah.
Good advice. Really good advice.
Mike, I want to thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure and great, just mind-boggling information that you gave out today.
Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks
Great
a lot.
talking to you.
All right, guys. Next week, we will not have a show. I'm going to be at PubCon Las Vegas. So we will be back the following week with an old friend of ours. Caleb McKelvin is going to come in the studio. He's going to talk about outreach for link building and that type of stuff. So
yeah, I think that's going to be a great show. If everybody talks about link building, but there's a different way to do it now.
Yeah. Caleb is he used to be the co-host of the show, and he's kind of moved on to bigger and brighter things. But yeah, he'll be back then. If you're going to be at PubCon, please stop by, say hi to me. I would love to meet the listeners and everybody. Please don't be shy.
Ask him to see the tattoos. That way we know you listen to the show.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thanks for your support in the show. Go to searchtalklive.com. Follow us on Twitter at searchtalklive.com. I'm sorry, at searchtalklive. And Matt, if they want to reach you on Twitter,
they can reach me at Best Web Design FL.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Search Talk Live is sponsored by the Robert Palmer family of companies.
Find the true value of your home when you log on. Homevalue.com.
If you have questions for Search Talk Live, or you're interested in being a guest or a sponsor of the show, email Robert at searchtalklive.com. That's searchtalklive.com.